While on this channel, we usually talk about the top teams and players that are dominating Valorant, sometimes we overlook another important part of the game. To have a top of Valorant, we need a bottom. The worst teams at the top level who at one point had so much hope in Tier 1, but then became a punching bag for the other top teams in the world. So I decided to go back and give you a brief history of Pro Valorant's worst Tier 1 teams, and you can decide who the worst team ever is for yourself. But if you want to be the best in your friend group, or when you solo queue and competitive like I do, then I highly suggest using the app Medal.tv to rapidly get better at Valorant or any of the other hundreds of popular games they support on their platform. A major issue that many gamers like myself ignore when trying to move up the ranked ladder is only learning how to fix your mistakes through making the same wrong choices in multiple rounds or games, lowering your rank over time. This is so inefficient and not what the pros do. This is where Medal.tv comes into play. No more losing critical gameplay, as Medal's 4K quality auto-clipping ability gives you the peace of mind that after your game is over, you'll have the best quality clips to look back on and figure out where you went wrong. Even if you forget to set it up before the match, Medal has event detection, so you don't have to worry about losing those critical moments, because I know that happened to me a lot when using other softwares before. With Medal, you don't have to worry about that anymore, as the app is super simple and lightweight to download onto your system, and will not slow down your game while it runs in the background, giving you the smoothest and most confident gameplay, knowing you're getting the best resolution and audio quality for your clips. Also, you can share your best moments right away with ease to whatever social media you're on to get feedback instantly. But really, Medal.tv is an excellent clip recorder that has so many interesting features that I didn't even get into today, like the editing tools or the ability to clip and chat with friends. So make sure you sign up and download Medal.tv through my link in the description so you can level up your game. And thanks Medal.tv for sponsoring this video, so let's dive right back into it. So this video is mainly going to focus on teams since franchising started, as it's a good and clean way to decide when true Tier 1 started. But I do have two honorable mentions for the first 2 full years of Valorant that I want to quickly show you. The way I chose the pre-franchised worst teams is by looking at who made more than one international event that season and performed the worst overall. So for the first full season in 2021, Japan's Crazy Raccoons takes the title as the inaugural worst team after winning the regional masters and the first challengers for Japan to qualify for Masters Reykjavik. It was clear that they were the best team in their region. But really, Japan has never been big in other FPSs before. So Crazy Raccoons had to represent their country well to change the narrative in this new game. And this team looked to be decent with talent like Neth and Medusa, who play on DFM right now. Their star though would be Munchkin, who is currently the IGL for the Masters winning Gen G. While Crazy Raccoons was good regionally, qualifying for every international in 2021, they went 1-6, only beating Liberty, who is also one of the worst teams, but only played in Berlin. Other than that, they were swept in each match, not winning a single match against any other international opponent, with them having one of the worst losses ever against Gambit, where they picked up 2 rounds the entire match. Part of the reason why they did so poorly is because of their first failure in Reykjavik. They brought in new players after that around Neth and Munchkin, which just didn't work either, making them the worst team in 2021 that made international events. This was unfortunate for Japan, but luckily their other top team, Zeta, made an underdog run in 2022 to motivate the region after Crazy Raccoons' multiple failures. In the second season, the worst team just moved over a few countries to XERXIA from Thailand. The year prior, while Crazy Raccoons struggled on the international stage, XERXIA, then known as X10, pulled off one of the most iconic early upsets against a Ye and FNS-led Envy, before being eliminated against the second place Gambit team in the map 3. Now as XERXIA, they looked ready to become a contender for a deep run. Most of the team from 2021 returned, but Pattyfan, their most experienced and knowledgeable player, who decided to retire from the game due to a wrist injury. So they brought in new Thai Jet player Surf to fill out the roster. And the change continued to work regionally, finishing in second just behind PaperX and Challengers to pick up one of the 2 spots to the second Masters Reykjavik. And in their first international match of the season, they had a rematch against Envy, now Optic, where they continued to have their number, beating them in the opener of Reykjavik. And it looked like this would be their season to reach DRX or PaperX levels of success for the Pacific region. But this would be their final international win as an org, losing a close map 3 to Team Liquid, then being eliminated in their final match against Optic in a 2-0 sweep to finish in 9th to 10th place. They continued their regional success to make Berlin and Champs, but went out in last place in both. They did put up a better fight than Crazy Raccoons did the year prior by pushing Crew, North Eption, and the EMEA version of FPX, 2 map 3s, but would end the season 1-6 internationally. Now, most of this team has turned into talent during the inaugural franchise season, but since then, most of them have been playing on different Tier 2 teams, with only really Scary and Cruz still starting on a Tier 1 team by the end of this last year. Now that we're out of the pre-franchising years, it's much easier and more objective to see who the worst teams are, so I'm going to give you the worst teams of each league, and unfortunately for one team, they'll be seen for both seasons. In 2023, we had 2 teams go winless during the regular season, but one of them isn't on this list as Crew pulled off an insane LCQ to make champions, sparing them from this list. But the other was not so lucky. Japan's DFM went 0-11 during the inaugural franchise season. Japan going into the year were not considered a deep region, with only Zeta ever making any international noise. So there were many questions on what the other Japanese team DFM would do to try to compete with the likes of PaperX, T1, and DRX. Unlike other teams in weaker countries who kind of go for a mashup of available talent from all over the region, they stuck with an almost completely Japanese team, with a collection of players from other top-tier Japanese rosters. They did, though, bring in 2 Korean players to round out the 6-player roster, which in the lock-in tournament, they tried to utilize against Giants. But right from the beginning, it looked like DFM were nowhere near ready to compete against the best in the world, as they were destroyed by a mid-EMEA team. And in the Pacific season, DFM was unable to turn it around, as they not only didn't have the skill level as a team to keep up, but the roles these players were all in were so messed up, as they couldn't find a consistently efficient entry player, as throughout the season they would bring in Jet player Saldam to try and help them out of their struggles, but nothing really worked. They only won a total of 2 maps all season, seeing them for the rest of the year being blown out in most maps. They ended with a negative 86 round differential, which is insane, but surprisingly isn't the worst one of the year, but more on that in a second. For DFM, they locked in the first ever winless season, going 0-11, with pretty much everyone on the team except Anthem being released during the offseason as he tried not to become a permanent laughingstock of the league. For the Americas, we did have Crew go winless during the regular season, but then turn it up when they needed to, so instead, MIBR will be taking the spot. After they went 3-6 during the regular season, then were swiftly eliminated in 2-0 sweep to finish in last in the LCQ. While they had glimpses of promise like against 100 Thieves that started EG's entire Cinderella run, or their 2-1 start to the regular season. As the year went on, there seemed to be internal conflict that really caused this team to fail in the end, as while they started on a losing streak, it seemed like their duelist Heat was struggling on the team after previously showing great promise as a Brazilian duelist prior to franchising. This seemed to be caused by the rest of the team not being Tier 1 caliber, as they were completely blown out by Lev, Sentinels, Furia, and Cloud9 all in a row. This caused internal conflicts resulting in Heat benching himself before the match against EG, leaving this ailing Brazilian team without their highest rated player for the rest of the matches. But while their season was essentially over, they ended up having one of the biggest roles in launching EG's Champions run. First being swept by them to keep EG in contention to make playoffs, then unexpectedly upsetting 100 Thieves in the final week of the regular season to eliminate them from playoffs, and letting EG sneak in to go on their miraculous run. They finished the season 3-6 before going into the single elimination LCQ match against the winless Crew team. But even with the EG roster supporting them from the stands, they were unable to start their own Cinderella run, being beaten 2-0, where of course Crew went on their crazy LCQ run to make champions, ending their inaugural season 3-8. Over the offseason, they tried a couple of new Brazilian players to hopefully rebound from their disappointing season, but if you watch this year, you know they didn't. More on that later. Finally, we get to the funniest bad team we ever had. Carmine Corp with Scream and Novera leading them. This team on paper was expected to be around the middle of the pack, but what followed was a hilarious season that I went over in detail on a previous video, which you can check out here or at the end of the video. But to recap, they were the French-speaking team in the EMEA League and had the brother duo of Scream and Novera, but right away it didn't look good. After being pushed to a map 3 against the Chinese representatives in lock-in FPX, before being destroyed by Loud in a 2-0 sweep. This was better than the other 2 bottom dwellers of the EMEA that year, Koi and Team Heretics, that some might think deserved this title, but it was how bad Carmine Corp were when they would lose their matches, only winning 4 maps the entire regular season, with them putting up a staggering negative 93 round differential. This is almost double what Koi and Heretics had. They even had to have their assistant coach step in to play halfway through the season. They were able to get one more win in the LCQ, beating out a bad BBL team in a map 3 overtime, but were eliminated in their next 2 matches. Of course, we know what happened after this, as they dropped most of their team outside of Shin and went on to qualify for Madrid, being a solid team this past year, a far cry from the year where they rode the bottom of the league. Now that moves us to the most recent season, where we saw the debut of the 4th regional league, and the competition was a lot closer in a lot of the leagues, but still there were a few teams that just couldn't get it done in the majority of their matches. So let's start with China, as their league overall was the closest, with no one really looking like the clear worst team. But when looking at the end of the season standings, Titan Esports ended with one less win than the rest of the bad teams, with them ending 3-7. They did start the season off well in the kickoff, with DRX's former controller and flex player RB leading the way for the team. But after the kickoff, they were unable to work well enough as a team to make any real noise during the season, as they ended with the worst round differential, with them being swept by most of the lower teams, with them actually surprisingly playing better when playing top tier opponents like FPX, Trace, and Billy. But it wasn't enough to get them out of being the worst team in China's first Valorant season. Moving not too far, we get to the only Ascension team we have on this list, who would have definitely been relegated from franchising with the new rules that have been introduced for future Ascension teams, as they only won a single game in the Pacific all season. The Singaporean org Bleed became an absolute mess right after they lifted the Ascension trophy. All sorts of drama between players and the org occurred all season long, at one point having factions of players that didn't get along and wouldn't communicate with one another. But from the outside, this Bleed team with Scary and Ye joining the team looked to be a solid roster in the Pacific League during Bleed's first of 2 seasons in Tier 1. They almost won their first map against T1, with Ye looking to return to his peak, and Scary continuing his dominance from Tier 2, but just barely lost, being swept 2-0. With that loss, the wheels on this team started to fall off right away, with Ye struggling dearly with the team looking like a mess, as players were playing roles they never did before, causing everyone to kinda underperform. Outside of the game, their team chemistry was gone. Crazy Guy consistently feuded with Ye, leaving players to pick a side, causing a massive rift in the team, leading Crazy Guy to be benched along with Egoist, with Zest from DRX stepping in, along with Retla, creating an even more diverse team with language issues coming into question. While Bleed hoped that these changes would help the team's cohesion and provide Ye with a space to return to greatness, it wasn't ever gonna work. Ye had to step back after a few more games, citing mental health issues, as at one point his anxiety was so bad he couldn't even see the screen when he was playing on the stage. While the rest of the team had issues communicating with each other, even without English-only speaking Ye, as they continued to be disconnected in their game plan, resulting in them only picking up a match against the previous worst team DFM in 3 maps. They ended the season 1-11, with a lot of the players being dropped once the season ended, as they were now in do or die to keep their spot in Tier 1. But out of seemingly nowhere, they were dropped from franchising due to management issues, with some players coming out and voicing how the org's leadership were very unprofessional, giving some insight on why this team did so bad this past year. Now with them removed from franchising, Boom Esports, the second place team from the past Pacific Ascension tournament, was moved up. It will be interesting what both teams will do with their rosters, and what will happen going forward with Bleed as an organization in Valorant. Next, let's look at a team that really hasn't shown anything in Valorant so far in Tier 1 during their 2 seasons. MIBR continues to be the worst team in the Americas, even after they made changes after last year. They started the season off well in kickoff, making it to play-ins, but even with them having a better team cohesion, once the regular season started, they struggled greatly, with their newest duelist Artizine having moments where he looked pretty impressive, along with more experienced players looking better with this roster than last year's team. But it still wasn't working, as the Brazilian teams looked to be the worst teams in the league, as all 3 of them went winless for a while to start the regular season. While Loud ended up winning a few games, and Fear were able to become a Brazil killer and defeat 100 Thieves, MIBR were unable to turn it on after coming out hot, with them picking up their first map win 7 matches in, then picking up their lone regular season win against an EG team that looked out of whack, saving them from complete embarrassment in the final week, but still end at the bottom of the standings, even after they brought in Shazam for a match, which was kind of funny. By the end of the season, MIBR made so many roster changes to try and right the ship that only Artizine and IGL Mazin remained on the team, as other rookie Brazilian talent was added later in the season. There will most likely be more changes, as another terrible season for MIBR would be disastrous for the reputation in the game, especially as there's a few Tier 2 Brazilian teams that didn't ascend. They would definitely be worth a shot after so many losses for this org. Lastly, let's move to Europe, where it's pretty clear who didn't look like they belonged. Koi, like the year before, didn't really improve much after trying to rebuild the team during the offseason, being really the only low-level team from last year that didn't all of a sudden become good like Carmine or Heretics. Like MIBR, they started off hot, making it to play-ins for kickoff after beating BBL and Team Liquid, but this would be their only win streak for the year. While they had some well-known players like XERXIA and Shados, the rest of the team was new to this level of competition, with them starting the season on a 4-game losing streak, until they were able to win a close one against the famously streaky Vitality. After this game, they started to play a little bit better, winning against Giant X and Na'Vi, but I have them as the worst team because of their 2-0 losses to the other 2 worst teams of the year, BBL and Gentlemates, with Shados and Grabinho looking to be the only true Tier 1 players on this team at this point. After having another disappointing season going 5-10, they decided to finally release their former world champion player XERXIA as they look to build this Polish core around these more promising players, and Shados as they try to finally have a good season as an org after 2 bottom-dwelling franchise years. Either way, no disrespect to any of the players or teams mentioned, as all these players at the top of Valorant are extremely talented, but someone has to be last. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. You can also check out my video on the Curse as Plague Ludwig's team, Moist Moguls, for 2 years now in Pro Valorant. I know you'll like it, so you can click on it right here.